hey, look, there goes Pussy Riot. You know, and I'm like, oh, that's crazy. What a quote I have here.
Hey, Larry, welcome to the Bulwark's Next Level podcast. Really appreciate it, man.
Sure, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Tim.
I have to confess. I have an ulterior motive for inviting you.
Oh, no.
And,
what is that?
You know, I had a good time on your podcast. I love Black on the Air. It's great. That was one reason. I had a good time hanging out with you that one time in LA. But the real reason is I am, my Denver Nuggets are in the playoffs here. And my lifelong goal is to get invited onto the Bill Simmons of the NBA show at the Ringer to talk about the Nuggets in the finals. And any Ringer person out there, I've been inviting on our podcast just in the hope to come at everybody from a different angle. I want to talk about the Nuggets. You know, you guys are what I consume. Like when I don't want to do politics stuff, I'm all Ringer NBA stuff. So, and my Nuggets, this could be our year.
I don't know why you want to talk to that Celtic lover, Bill Simmons, though. That doesn't make sense to me.
If it's a head-to-head, though, baby. If it's Nuggets Celtics.
Denver, you should absolutely go in and trash him as much as possible. Yeah.
All right, well, that's what I'm hoping for. Anyway, thank you for doing this. The timing is perfect. Because we are now, last weekend, we're taping this on Correspondents Day weekend here in D.C., but this will run next week. So last weekend was the Correspondents Dinner. You gave the last keynote before the Correspondents Center completely collapsed into insanity in the Trump years, where it's like everything's too serious now. We can't joke about shit. Like our democracy's collapsing. Like this is not cool anymore to do this. So you gave the last one when it was still cool to kind of make jokes at ourselves and take the. Have you thought about that? Have you realized that you're the end of an era?
Hassan gave one, but I think
Hassan
Trump
was last year. Right, Hassan was in 22 or 21 or 22. Yeah, so it has slowly started again.
No.
But I'm telling you,
he was a couple years ago. I think he did it during Trump, and Trump didn't show up. Right?
Is that right? Was he the one during Trump? I have to tell you, last year I went to the parties. I'm not doing it this year. I'm skipping.
Is what happened. I did break it.
It's really uncomfortable now. I mean, even in the Biden years, it's like. Back in the old days, all those things. You're up there. You're making fun of Chris Christie. You're making fun of Hillary. You're making fun of everybody. It's equal opportunity.
Absolutely.
Nowadays, it's kind of, and then you go to the parties after, and it's like, oh, there's some Republicans. There's some Democrats. You can josh each other.
Exactly.
But like these days, it's like, you don't want to be seen next to like who wants to make small talk with Kellyanne Conway? I mean, like these people, like nobody wants to make small talk with fascists, right?
So the
vibe is a little different.
The vibe is different. Yeah, it's funny you say that because. You're right. It's funny because I got more pushback from the left than I did from the right in terms of my performance. Like a lot of people, especially establishment people, did not like the fact that I called the president like they were not happy with that. That came from the left. And a lot of my jokes were directed at the left. There was a small percent, like it was maybe 70% at the left, 30% at the right, A couple
you went hard at Wolf Blitzer. The room. I rewatched it last night. You went hard at Wolf, and the room was not digging it.
Seeing it, they hated me for that. They weren't just not digging it, Tim. They hated me for that. And what happened with that joke was my tone was a little bit. I mean, here's the thing. You're standing next to the freaking president of the United States, and I had to have the funniest president ever too. It's like funny presidents like Obama, JFK, Reagan, like probably in that order, right? In terms of just funny. If you have to follow any of those people in terms of humor, good luck. But Obama, number one. And he had some great joke writers. And he drops the mic. I'm like, what the fuck, Obama, in my mind, So
tough to follow.
So they weren't trying to see another brother come up, and make jokes at their expense.
Him up. Yeah.
Exactly. Because he made jokes at their expense, and they were like, oh, Mr. President, But
was that your toughest room, you think? It's a tough room.
It's a tough room, yeah. It really is a tough room. But I just acted like they were laughing. I decided, Larry, just in your mind, pretend like you're killing. That's what I told myself. I said, no matter what and if you look at me, you see me kind of laughing like they're enjoying it.
No, I would have watched it. It's kind of fun.
It was so
I thought maybe you were buffing
yourself.
I thought you were like puffing yourself up by laughing. Was it psychological, or were you just kind of
it was psychological for me not to just completely implode, for me just not to be sad as I was doing it.
My critique of it now with the distance is you ignored Trump. And I was kind of wondering why. Like, you went hard at Christie, you ignored Trump. So we're in the middle of the 2016 election. Sebastian has this updated. Hassan did do the next year after you with Trump. Trump didn't come, and then they didn't have him for a few years. But so you're up there, and it's the middle of the 2016 election. So did you think the Trump jokes were just too easy, too pat? I mean, you go at Christie hard. You go at like people sucking up to Trump pretty hard, but you ignored Trump.
Yeah, because you're right. I thought the Trump jokes were too easy. That's exactly right. Because they had already gone after Trump before. You know, Seth Meyers famously did it. Right. At that time, everybody was joking about Trump. And I'm like, this is just an echo chamber. I can't go in and make Trump jokes, you know. So I did it right at the beginning, and it was an accurate prediction, you know, where at the beginning, the first joke was that next year, you know, I forgot what the joke was, but it was basically predicting Trump was going to be president.
Yeah,
you know, was my joke.
I forget what it was too, but
it turned out to be true. So
right, but everybody laughed because they're like, it's so ridiculous.
Oh,
and this
that's
was like the mindset.
That's so ridiculous. Exactly, but it was true.
So you know, I wanted to have you on, you know, as we do on the show, just a little politics stuff at the top. You, on your podcast, you do a ton of politics. Like, I mean, you'd be on, I'm a very, very minor political celebrity. You know, you had Katie Porter on last week. I want to talk about that a couple weeks ago. Like, what was the inspiration for that for you to kind of move from, you know, doing comedy and to have this podcast and to like focus it so much on politics? Like, what was the primer for it?
Well, it's a combo platter. There's politics, there's entertainment. Sometimes we talk about writing, human interests, you know, whatever. It basically, I had David Copperfield on. The pod really covers the things that I'm interested in, as opposed to just politics or that type of thing.
Right, sure.
And many times, I haven't done it in a while, ironically, but I always had a weigh-in in the beginning where I would try to be topical and cover what's going on and give kind of my, almost like a nightly show type of thing a little bit in some ways in my mind. But I haven't done it a lot lately. And one of the reasons why is because it's so toxic out there, Tim. And I want to get away from that a little bit. And so I'm focusing more on just having good conversation interviews. I consider when I have someone on my show, I don't approach it as an interview. I approach it as a conversation, and as if I'm chatting with a friend or that type of thing. So they're never intended to be hostile. They're never gotcha. I'm not trying to expose somebody. Yeah. It doesn't have that tenor that you see out everywhere else. When people listen to my show, they know it's like they're invited to my house and we're sitting down, we're having drinks, and whoever comes in there, as you know, when you're in there, we're having a fun conversation. And my goal is for the audience for me and the audience, to get to know, who is this person in front of me? Let's learn a little bit about them. Let's see a side of them maybe we don't see, but it's not intended to have a divisive conversation or take sides on something. If we disagree about something, it's an agreeable disagreement, not a disagreeable disagreement. Like, I've had Ben Shapiro on the show. I've had different people from the right on the show.
Wait a minute, you had Ben Shapiro on?
I did.
I didn't read. I went back to listen to some of them. I didn't make it to that one.
I had one like 4 years ago. We did each other's pod, you know, and this was like 2018 maybe, so it was a while ago. But I wanted to have a conversation. Did you ask him about
his Candace Owens hiring? It was an interesting personnel choice for me.
It was pre all that. It was pre Candace Owens, and it was pre that, you know. But at that point,
would you have those guys on now? Like, do you feel like you can even have those conversations now?
It's tough. It's tough, Tim, because things get more divisive, you know, and people, the sides that people stake out. Like, there was one point I probably would have had Candace on, but it was about 4 or 5 years ago, because I tend to. I don't know why, but I kind of catch people at the beginnings of things, you know, when they're doing stuff. And when Candace first broke, I thought, oh, who is this brash voice that isn't afraid to troll the left? Like, that's how I saw her in my mind. And I appreciate, and one of the reasons why I have Ben on is because the left doesn't get trolled a lot by fearlessness, you know. Yeah. People are afraid to, and I'm saying this as a person on the left, right?
Yeah, sure.
Because I like I like a good fight, not an unfair fight. Yeah. And to me, I always feel like, as somebody who's considered on the left, I'm not on the extreme. I consider myself a centrist, basically, but I realize where people put me, so that's fine. But you know, the left side of the scale really does control a lot of the culture, you know, and who gets to say so in the culture. And the right, for whatever reason, doesn't, and I think a lot of their frustration comes from that, and it used to be the other way around, But so to me, I've always enjoyed when people stand up to the left. Whether I agree with them or not is not the important thing, But to me, it's fun to see people who control the left as much as the left trolls the right, because the left trolls the right.
Deserved.
But they do it with impunity. But when the right trolls the left, it's not always with impunity,
Yeah.
So
let's do.
So that's where I was coming from.
Yeah, that takes me into the Katie Porter thing. I wanted to talk to you about that. Well, just firstly, like, what's your big picture take on like her and that Senate race? Like talking to her, what was your takeaway from that convo? And then I want to pick a few. I want to poke the left a little bit. I want to poke her a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll poke left and right. It doesn't matter to me.
Let's do
just so you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Katie Porter. That's interesting. I don't know. I was trying to figure out as I'm talking to her, does she think she can actually win this Senate seat? She was a very nice person. I had her on my show, Wilmore. It was on Peacock when I had it. And I remember in the beginning that we had some technical issues, and she was really in a bad mood. And I thought, oh my God, I wonder if she's going to be pissy during this interview. Was going through my mind too. If I'm going to see some of that, like, who really is this woman?
Yeah.
But she was very nice. She was very sweet. We had a good conversation beforehand. But I was trying to feel out what's her deal. Does she see herself as this leader of the party going forth? Does she see herself really winning this? Because she has some stiff competition here. What does she really think about this? I get the feeling, I think she feels like she can, but I don't know if she's convinced about it.
Really?
That's kind of the takeaway that I got. Other than that, there wasn't a whole lot. That was my
the thing
personal,
I liked about her was I'm going to praise her before I needle a little bit, because the thing that I liked about the interview was I think she's at her best when she's like just talking about being a mom, being a person that wants to fix things. Right? Like sometimes you get into the little bit Elizabeth Warren space where you're a little bit scoldy, and like she wasn't like that at all on your show. And it was a very kind of personable convo, and I think that the Dems need that. Like I look at this field, and so here was my thing that I wanted to kind of push back on her on is like,
I agree.
The Dems run everything in California. Okay.
Yeah.
And the frustrating thing is I listen to these interviews, and you're interviewing her, and it's like, and I'm not expecting you to, be Tim Russert or whatever, but you're interviewing her, and you're like, what? You even asked her, what's a problem you see on the left?
Right.
And she like kind of was like, oh, we don't fight enough for, I don't know, it was like reform of congressional stocks or something.
It's a flattering problem is what they always say.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And it's like, well, look, in California, people are moving. Not like people are moving into Florida and Texas. That's just a reality. You just look at the numbers.
Right.
People that like costs are high, housing costs are high, crime is up. Maybe not as much as it gets stereotyped, right? But like that, it's a real thing in people's lives in a lot of these cities. Like, what's your nobody in that Senate race, or nobody, like, even in California, like, seems to have answers for that. Like, they have talking points about why it's actually not as bad as the right's saying, and they're right about that, right? A lot of times it's exaggerated, but, like, does that frustrate you at all? Like, you're living in L.A.
Yeah, what frustrates me about what you're talking about, the problem is no one's really taking accountability for the big problems here, and the fact that they've been the ones in charge, like you say.
Right.
In Los Angeles, homelessness is such a huge problem. It's devastating when you see the streets and everything. And I always see the problem put into one bucket of affordable housing. And I'm like, and I had a conversation, I can't remember his name right now, about this like a few years ago about affordable housing and everything. And to me, that's such a Band-Aid answer to me. And it doesn't really address a lot of the issues, but it acts like I wish we could do something about it, It's this thing that we have no control over, But it's like, but why is this happening on your watch is never addressed too,
Right.
And why are you always the ones to fix the thing that's happening on your watch?
Yeah.
I wish the state were more balanced. It used to be a lot more balanced. We've had Republican governors in the past. We've had divided houses and that kind of stuff. California was always the destination. I am frustrated by it. The crime thing is very frustrating to me. I've talked about that on my pod.
Yeah.
I feel like not enough accountability has been taken in that. Now, the residents of California I feel a little differently than the establishment politique of California, both on the right and the left. Many people that I know on the left are concerned about crime as much as I am and that kind of stuff and some of the stuff that's going on. I think a lot of people feel like, what are we going to do? You kind of throw your hands up.
What's your take? I never answered your take. How do you balance? The crime issue is so touchy because, like, the complaints from the Black Lives Matter and the left about policing are fair and apt, right? Like this doesn't happen in other countries, the treatment of, particularly young black men. At the same time, like, not policing these neighborhoods is not an option. This wasn't the reason why I moved out of Oakland, but I had 2 bullet holes in my house in Oakland. There weren't cops on the streets. I don't love cops. I was always more of a libertarian Republican. I was never a pro cops guy, but you know what? So how do you balance that? Like, when you're kind of in those conversations in black community in LA, like, kind of, well, we don't like the way the policing is happening, but maybe no policing isn't the answer, right? It's these communities that are getting punished.
It's an answer that I'll talk about in 2 different ways. One is there's a historical context to this, which many other, I'll say, non-black people don't quite understand, that the black community, especially the poor black community areas, have had a relationship with the police that goes back decades. Yeah. And when an incident happens, for most people, it's a story. It's almost like a new story that happens, and there should be a beginning, middle, and end to that story. But to us, it's another chapter in this long book of relationship. Yeah. And that's why the black community gets triggered faster when these things happen than other people who just see it as an individual event most of the time, which is why the George Floyd thing connected with people, because that one individual event was so heinous, people had to be engaged. But it's not, it doesn't always have to be that heinous for black people to go, there goes another one, because we're in this long book of relationship. And there were many abuses by police over the years in many black communities that have happened, that have been documented, that we know about, that our parents have told us about, that we've seen ourselves. Some of it has never fully been addressed. A lot of it, I feel, isn't just a racial dynamic. It's a power dynamic, which I used to talk about. I used to say it's more blue versus black sometimes than necessarily white versus black. I think when it gets caught up in the identity of the police officer, that's not really what the question is, It's,
Memphis. We just saw this in Memphis.
It's always been a power dynamic in the way poor black people, especially, not only, have been kind of treated as a group, Okay, so that's one particular issue. It's a real issue. Yes, it's gotten better in some ways. In some ways, things haven't been addressed. A separate issue is crime, right? And what do you do about crime? Now, many people who live in these communities do not want to get rid of the police. They know the police are a very important part of addressing the crime in their areas. I'm not a defund the police person. I never was. In fact, 2 or 3 years ago, I've had people in my pod where I've said, why would you want to do that? And they thought I was the crazy one because it wasn't popular to be against it.
Right.
But, my father was in law enforcement. I have a different perspective of this too, And I always have my whole life, been able to see, I've never been anti-police. I've been anti-police brutality and abuse, but not anti-police. There's a distinction, And you can't just look at the role of the police from a binary perspective, because police are there for the whole community. What about Asians? Do they get a say in, do we get police or not? Right. What about the Latino community? Do they get to say, is it just black people who get to say you have to defund the police and that's it? No, like that part is crazy. So there's never, because the issue is such a hotbed issue, sometimes, and because the reforms come from an activist group or an activist arm, and remember, activists will always many times push to the extreme, because then if you get something here, that's probably where the fix ends up. It rarely starts at here, But unless they're pushing here, you probably wouldn't get to here. That, to me, is a proper role for activism. Doesn't mean government has to act like activists. Doesn't mean regular citizens doesn't have to be an activist. These days, people expect regular citizens to be activists.
Right. It's like your Instagram feed is an activism.
Yeah.
You got to post a square.
When did I sign up to be an activist? So it's like most people say, what? Why do we even have activists if everybody's going to be an activist? Right. That was my criticism of the NBA. It's like, why does everybody have to kneel, or that type of thing? Yeah. What if you're not an activist? Isn't there a role for activism too? So if you whenever they take polls within these communities that are ravaged by crime in their communities, it is overwhelmingly want more proper police engagement. They just don't want improper police engagement, but they don't want no police engagement. That's the part that activists throw out most of the time.
I want to get into your career and do a little bit of identity stuff and writing stuff, but I have one more just political. It's a political podcast. Let's just pretend you're a pundit, okay? I want some Larry Wilmore punditry. Kamala Harris.
I would say, why do people want to know what I think? Like, I've never been in politics.
This is why people want to know what you think about this, because I'm about to explain it. You are a performer. You know about skills. You know about performing skills, and that's one part of politics. All right, that's one part of politics. Kamala, that's to me that seems like her biggest problem, right? It's the camera stuff. I mean, she seems like a nice person. Everybody I know talk to, and there's some issues. I'm sure that she has some issues on certain policies on both the left and the right. But like her biggest issue is when I watch her in these interviews, it seems like I can watch the little hamster rolling on the wheel in there. Like, I don't want to get in trouble, Like, how do you assess that? I mean, she was your senator for a while, now she's a VP. She ran, now she's a VP. Yeah. Like, what would be if they brought you in and were like, Larry, we need some Hollywood advice for Kamala.
Sure. Yeah. I'd be happy to give it. I like Kamala and I don't like her. Both of those things are true. And let me put this in sense. I think she's been unfairly called things like incompetent or this or, not. I don't believe that at all. I think she's very capable. I think she can, competency is not an issue with her. She has what I call an Al Gore problem. Okay. Here's the Al Gore problem. Al Gore was not a talented politician, okay? And he was in the shadow of one of the most talented politicians ever, of course, was Bill Clinton, right? Al Gore was uneasy on the stage, couldn't really connect with people. He seemed awkward. We still don't know who he is, we don't have a sense of him, of the essence of who he is,
Jeb had jokes too.
Yeah, exactly. There were, and you can always tell that, and it's funny, and W, just by that folksy thing was enough, for people to get a sense of him. Whether it's true or not is not the point. People just want to be able to connect. You can't connect with Kamala. There isn't a thing there that you connect to, that you identify with, that you say, oh, she's like me, or she gets me, or that type of thing. And the problem is, there's so much going on in the head about trying to do this right and trying to do that right, and it's just too much, and I think when you're asking people their vote to be a leader of them, it's different than to be, let's say, a fighter for them, two different things, which is why sometimes running for Senate is different than running for president. Like, I thought the thing she did as a senator, she was in a great role. She was in her fighter role, which I think she's comfortable in, that feisty fighter role. When you have those hearings. She looked like a star in those positions, which it made sense. I can see why people want her to run for president. But when she ran for president, she shrank. There was something that shrank about her, because to me, everything was calculated now to try to do this and that. Even the way she attacked Biden on the stage, to me, didn't seem genuine. It seemed like it was trying to keep both areas open. It was very calculated. There was something about it that wasn't genuine. Not that you can't do those things, but you have to be, people, when they're looking for somebody to lead them, they want a genuine quality, even, by the way, this is going to sound funny, even if that genuine quality is fake.
Right.
It's like,
this is classic.
You know what I mean?
Trump is genuiously fake. Right?
Exactly.
Like
exactly. Even if it's fake, they still want it. That doesn't matter. Like, I think it was John Wayne, his famous quote. I'm ascribing to him, but it may have been other people. What's the secret to acting? Is to fake sincerity. Once you've learned to do that, you've got it was something like that. So to me, she is uncomfortable on the big stage for whatever reason, and it shows, and it's always awkward, and it just,
So how would you fix it? She comes to you, she wants to stand up, I'm sure people ask you for stand up advice. You got, what do you have any advice for? Performance anxiety advice?
I think she needs less advice, honestly. I think
That's right.
I think the problem is she's getting too much advice. That's what I mean by the Al Gore thing. I think he got way too much advice, and then he's got 1,000 voices in his head. It's like, you know what? Just go out and talk to people. Don't have a script. You know, I remember
worrying about making mistakes, you're making mistakes.
Exactly.
Right.
I remember seeing this. Did this thing for Clinton Global Initiative. I think in 2015 they wanted me to host this thing, and this was so rare, Jim. I got a chance to hang out backstage with Bill Clinton, and we talked for about a half an hour, and just to shoot the shit with an ex-president. I mean, that's crazy. And he was so cool. He was so nice. We're talking about everything. And Pussy Riot was also going to be there. And it was so funny. He goes, hey, look, there goes Pussy Riot. And I'm like, oh, that's crazy. What a quote I have here. And but Hillary came by because she was going to do the thing too. And so she shows up. And at that point, I think she hadn't announced her run yet. I think for that. And getting to meet Hillary, to me, was such a treat. I always admired her. I wasn't one of those Hillary hater type people, Yeah. I critiqued when I thought it was necessary, but it didn't come from a stance of, not liking her. I really admired her. And she couldn't have been nicer, Tim. She was so genuine. I thought, wow, Hillary's going to win if she runs. This person, we were talking and everything. And so then we're doing the thing, and Clinton is speaking, he's doing his thing, and he's being Bill Clinton, and he's fucking awesome as he always is, right?
Right.
Hillary goes up and does her thing, and it's completely scripted, and it's a completely different person. And I'm like, there's the problem.
We're in trouble.
There it is right there. I mean, there it is. I had a completely different experience. When she was in front of the audience, it was a completely different experience than I had behind her. And I'm not the first one to say this. Other people have said it. And to me, it's a scripting problem. It's like, throw the script away. Stop reading.
Just talk.
Answer questions.
It's not an accident. The best day she ever had was when she cried. It's not an accident that her best political campaign day was the time she cried. That wasn't in the script.
But then she went right back into a scripted situation. And it's probably where she feels comfortable, whatever. Yeah. And she was always more effective governing or doing the other thing than campaigning. So some people are just not good at that part of it.
This reminds me, your best WHCD White House Correspondents' Dinner joke was the one that made me actually laugh out loud was, and we're here with Michelle Obama, who's the epitome of like grace and charity and dignity or something, and we're also with Bill Clinton. His 3 favorite strippers were grace and charity and dignity. Or so I don't remember what the 3 names were.
I don't even remember that joke.
Yeah, it was about Bill Clinton's stripper joke. It was like his 3 favorite strippers' names.
Are you sure that was my joke?
It was you. I just watched it. It was a good joke.
Oh my God, I don't even remember that
I
joke.
watched it last night. I promise you it's true. Go back and find it. Okay.
Wow.
Let's get off of politics. I wanted to get into your career, but there's one thing that jumped out at me. Your show's called Black on the Air. Like, you have this epic run of just being a key player in all this great Black American art and Living Color, Bernie Mac show, which I loved, Insecure now, others. You can do your whole bio. Like, when the interview I was listening to, you said that there was that at times you sometimes feel uncomfortable in Black spaces because of being mixed race, etc. And I had to get at that question about identity and just kind of, I just want to put in a quarter and hear you talk about that.
Can you give me?
You don't remember ever saying that?
I don't remember saying I'm uncomfortable in Black spaces.
Not about being it wasn't about saying you're uncomfortable. It was just about saying about how in Black spaces sometimes you're like, oh, you're not Black. I'm not Black enough for that. Or you know what I mean? That kind of
I think I was talking about. I think I was talking about when I was growing up and when I was starting out. I think that was the context for that. And it wasn't uncomfortable. It was, I may have just been, I'm trying to remember the context because the issue was about Black identity, I believe. I have always deconstructed race and identity, you know, my entire career. One of my early jokes in my stand-up was, a lot of people ask what I'm mixed with, because I'm like,
exactly.
And they make that face like, mix it something, And I always said, look, if I was a beer, I'd be Negro Light. And I said, and I am a third less angry than the regular Negro. That was always the punchline. It always got a big laugh. But to me, it's deconstructing.
This is what you were, by the way, this is what you were talking about when I asked about. I think I'm just misquoting you, but it's this topic.
So it must be related to that because I'm always deconstructing our ideas of race, identity of race. And it's not just what white people think about black is what black people think about black. And many times when I was growing up, and you weren't properly black if you weren't culturally black, and
Right.
sometimes you'll see that thrown at blacks if they're not culturally black in a proper way or don't have the proper, and so I may have been responding to that and deconstructing those ideas, because I've always been suspicious about being attached to any large group.
Yeah.
Didn't matter what that large group was. So that's kind of why my brain is always contrary, and why I'm going to be surprising sometimes maybe with my answers to things, because if everybody's doing something, I'm a little suspicious of it, and I'm going to think about maybe doing something else. They may be right, by the way, but I'm just going to be a little suspicious. So if everybody's telling me that black people have to act a certain way, I'm going to say, well, I think something's wrong with your thinking. Why do we have to act a certain way to be black? That doesn't make sense to me. Why can't you? Aren't people supposed to be individuals? Aren't we supposed to, be able to have free thoughts? Do we have to subscribe to the same things in order to be authentic? That doesn't make sense. Which is why I've always had, a soft spot for black conservatives, because they've many times have been called anti-black or non-black or not black and properly black or whatever. And I always thought that's unfair. You've never heard me use those terms, because I've always thought, can't people think for themselves? What does that have to do with their blackness?
Yeah,
sure.
That's
a separate issue,
So I wonder how that manifests in the workplace. You're in all these, and that is the essence, I guess. You tell me though, this could be wrong, of these shows, In Living Color, right? It's oh, hey, we all these black identity issues are so central to that. So I just want, was that natural that you were drawn to that? Did you feel like you got stereotyped? I don't know if that's the right word, but you know what I mean? Do you feel like you got pushed down that path, or you were you're creatively inspired by, that kind of work?
There are two issues. In Living Color was never a political show, it was a cultural show, so it's different.
Right.
Nobody was taking sides between Democrats and Republicans or right and left.
True.
It was more a show about the different types of us out there, more than black versus white type of thing. When you look at
kind of an internal conversation, interfamily.
Exactly. All the different Easter eggs in that cartoon, but they're all Easter eggs. That's kind of what it was. All different colors. So even Men on Film, which was one of the more famous sketches, that was two gay black men reviewing films. That wasn't political. It wasn't taking sides. It was it was just having fun with this identity thing. So In Living Color always came from a space of fun, laughs, showing something that wasn't always shown, but it wasn't a taking sides thing, which to me is more of a modern thing of taking sides. So that's the environment that I was in. It was more deconstructing or exposing that type of thing. I did a show called the PJs. It was the animated show with Eddie Murphy, and it was in the projects, and all of our jokes were at ourselves, most of them,
Right.
And one was the HUD office, Housing Urban Development, and I came up with this joke, and I remember the network was what does that mean? It said HUD, keeping you in the project since 1965 was the joke, And I thought it is a great double entendre, It's is that what we really want to do? Is stay in the projects? So, we're keeping you in the projects here. And they were like, well, what do you mean by that? I'm like, who cares what I mean? It's just a joke. What do you care what I mean? Why should that be of interest to you? I remember answering that question that way. What do you care what I mean by it was what my answer was,
How did that, those kind of material change between, back then, the PJs and In Living Color to, now, Insecure? You know what I mean?
And Insecure is a cultural show that isn't really about race, but it's these people's lives that we don't always get to see, but the racial thing isn't really a part of its makeup in terms of a deconstruction. It's more about the identity of a person that doesn't quite know where they're going or who they are. It's more universal.
I think so.
In that
and maybe
sense.
this is, and I love that you say that, because you're in there in the creation and doing that and writing it, and so my perspective is a total just outsider, consumer,
Sure.
and it's for me, and maybe this is just me going out seeking out the wrong art, but you see so many layers of Issa and just this character, the depth of this, character and her relationships. And there is the cultural element, but the black community and her family. And I just I'm like, I don't feel like I've gotten to see characters like that, like
Exactly.
a lot of like black women characters like that.
Exactly.
So maybe it's not intentionally about race, but it's kind of is because I'm learning new things because I don't,
Well,
I'm learning new things I've
I
never
appreciate
seen
you
before.
saying that. Yes, it's intentional that we're showing this culture because we haven't seen it, but I'm saying the subject matter isn't about that. So that's the distinction that I'm making. The clothes that we put on are about that. Like the Bernie Mac show, it was never about a black comedian, and talking about race. Like I always say, what the Bernie Mac show was about was children are terrorists. I don't negotiate with terrorists. Like that's what it was about, and it's in the DNA of every scene, and that's what's relatable about it. Now, for me, as Larry Wilmore, I'm saying I also wanted to show this successful black man who was in a good marriage. It was 2-parent household who were taking care of these kids. Like that stuff was important to me, but the show's never about that. I just put that in there,
That's cool.
Some of these things. I wanted to show a positive view of this, that he was rich and he was not apologetic about it. Like, in fact, Bernie boasted about how much he had,
Yeah, right.
So, and I thought that was great too. There was no apology for success, which sometimes you see people do,
It's a little bit of you might not like this, is a little bit of a Trumpian element to the Bernie character, just in that degree, right? Of just like
in
a fuck you.
Yes, in the sense, in those days, Trump was popular with the hip-hop crowd, actually, because there was kind of a braggadocio. So there's a little bit of that type of thing in Bernie, which is part of kind of that culture of what that is, but not in the sense of tearing down people or that part of what that is. It's more of that
for sure.
Yeah.
Did you get the zero? I'm curious. I'm always curious about the 0 to 1 of writing something. Was that so? You did that for Bernie? Like you created it? Like there was a blank piece of paper and you created and wrote something.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that process for either Bernie or just in general. For me, just doing more. I was always an operative, right? So like the writing thing is something I just started to do, and the hardest part. I know this is not an insightful comment, but is like to go from 0 to 1, right? Like people have come to me and said, "Hey, you should write a political show," and I'm like, I don't even know how to do page. I bet I might be good at that if somebody gave me page 8, the first page 18. I could do 18 to 19, right? But how do you do page 1?
So, dramatic writing, of course, is a process. I studied playwriting in college, and that sort of thing, and the creative process, it's kind of both this mystery and there's a technical part of it too. Like I'm amazed by how people write songs. It's like, where does that come from? How do you do that? I remember I think Dustin Hoffman was with Paul McCartney, was asking that question, and that's when Paul wrote Picasso's last words or something. Like he said, well, let's just do something. I don't know if this is true, but looked in the paper. Picasso just died. A grand old painter died last night. His paintings on the wall, and it's like, where did this come from? It's like, and so that's just he's creating something with the tools that he knows how to create. So there's that. Like I have tools of how to create something, how to put things together, and then how to develop them based on my skills as a writer. Now, how do you do that is a separate thing, and where do you draw inspiration from? Is separate too. And that, to me, I have to be an antenna for things. So, and I have to investigate what feels like something that might make for good storytelling. So that's the brain that I'm using for that.
Yeah.
In terms of the Bernie Mac show, I was, and I don't know how much you want to talk about this part of it, but when I've talked about this, because I've lectured to writers and that kind of stuff and talked about these things, but my creative process, many times when you're creating something, is different than when you're just executing something that already exists, right? Because the creative process, everything is new. So where do you draw from? So I say I always draw from 3 different things, consciously or subconsciously. One is like, is there a story that happened to me that I want to dramatize? Maybe something happened in my childhood. Maybe I went through something in school. Maybe there's a work thing. I thought, what? This is a good story. I need to write this, and put this on television. I think it'll make a good show. Many people do that. Second way is there something I'm observing in the culture that I find interesting? Not something that happened to me. Am I observing something that I think would make a good story?
Yeah.
What is something that I think, oh, that thing looks interesting. I should write about that. And now I'm being educated about something, and I'm dramatizing this thing that I'm observing. The last thing is, and this is a third rail that I've always done. what is happening in the state of television itself that maybe I'm making a comment on or doing something differently? Like, in other words, in the technical aspect of storytelling, am I deconstructing or doing something different? Because I like form too. Form is also a ways to start a story. If you look at The Office, the way that Ricky Gervais, he changed the form of something and was able to tell a different story, but it was taking a different form and using that as a way to tell a story, as opposed to if that was in the traditional 3-camera setup of The Office, it wouldn't have quite worked because we're observing behavior. So you had to technically do something different. You see what I'm saying?
Was that where Insecure fit as a third thing, a commentary on TV?
Insecure,
or was that...
not necessarily. Insecure was, by the way, there's always a combination of these in different ways.
Yeah, sure.
But Insecure was more like we wanted to have on there, like, why is there not a black girls, like that type of thing, something with that type of feel. So there was already a form that exists, but it just hadn't existed for us. That's kind of what it was.
Yeah.
And a lot of
for just resonating on me, my side, I'm like, so I have this, my adopted daughter is black, and it's just like, and for me, it's just like the Insecure, and I read Americana at the same time, and I'm like, I'm never gonna know your inside of your brain, but now I'm like, I at least have like a tiny window, to kind of see like what has happened, like what is going through. That's just so separate from my like suburban experience. But so Insecure, I guess but the story you're saying was more about the culture, but the fact that it was just different. Black
the story was more about. Who is this girl? Like Insecure started with, it was inspired by Issa's web series, Awkward Black Girl. Now, so once again, in the culture of television, we don't get to see this character, Awkward Black Girl. Usually it's sassy black woman, she usually will put you in your place. She's got a lot of confidence, she knows more than you know. That's been kind of the archetype of black women in the television space. Issa's character was different. She was withdrawn. She was insecure, as we say. She doubted herself. Her situations were awkward. She didn't have the put down. She would think of the put down later when she was talking to her mirror, and then she would know what to say. But in the situation, she was socially awkward. Now, all of us can relate to that, but we've never been able to dramatize that. So the technical part of it is, we haven't seen this girl on television. That's the technical part. So we're like, And then the content of it is, okay, let's draw that out. What are the aspects of her life and who she is? And Issa and I spent a month just talking about these things. And like, it was almost me interviewing her every day, talking about her, like extracting it. What should be in the show? What shouldn't be in the show? This type of thing. And that's how we kind of created that show out of these observations about the relationship between a person like that and the world. Yeah,
that's so cool. So then, and Bernie, I'm sorry, just we got down this path, and then
so Bernie, I was like, Bernie. Part of what was underneath that was the heartache of raising kids, And I was drawing from my own life. The first part of it, my parents divorced when I was young, and there were 6 of us kids, and I was relating to the toll that it took on my mom and how hard it was when she was raising us in that. And I thought there's stuff in there for a show. And at the time, I had small children, and it was taking a certain toll on my wife in different ways, and I was observing this. We had a different relationship to it, and I thought, ooh, there's a show in here. And then I was observing something in the culture. I was seeing how, at that time, kids were doing this, emancipating themselves from parents and that type of thing. I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I thought, this is something I want to dramatize, this relationship that kids think that they should have with parents. And I thought that was funny, And so it was something I was observing. And then in the state of television, most shows were multi-camera at that time.
Yeah.
And I was looking at some reality shows, what was going on, and I wanted to do something technically different that could allow us to observe the action rather than it being kind of forced at us, So it almost like, my first idea for the show was to have cameras rigged up in a house and just make it feel like we were observing these people
real
living.
world style.
Yeah, that was the first way that I thought it. And then I came up with a more stylistic way to do it. But it always involved Bernie kind of talking to us directly, talking to the camera. And that came from 2 things. It came from, there was a show called 1900 House where people had to live like it was 1900 there in England, And it was so fascinating just to see, how behavior, it was so hard on them and everything. It was the hardest on the mom, of course, because she had the hardest job.
Right.
But they also
had butter.
Oh, the dad had it great. He got to leave in the morning and come back later. He had it amazing. And but they had a confessional camera that was like in a closet somewhere, and they could go confess things that they had done. And so they go in there. I had a Snickers bar today. I knew I wasn't supposed to ever, but I couldn't take this anymore. And I thought that's a fascinating tool of storytelling. This confessional
works so well
camera
for Bernie too, because Bernie's like hiding from his kids in the
Bernie
closet.
Could confess to America what he was feeling, I thought that would be an interesting way to help tell a story. And then the second part that I drew that from was in Bernie's stand-up act, he talked to the crowd directly as well as telling jokes. So in the middle of his act, he was in Charlotte, South Carolina, I think, North Carolina, whatever, and he would say, Charlotte, you know what I'm talking about. Charlotte, you know Bernie Mac don't do that. You know Bernie Mac feels that way. Charlotte, And I thought, this is so great. Bernie treats the audience like they're his best friend, like they're one person, not a whole crowd, And I thought it'd be interesting if he did that to America. America, when Bernie Mac say he wants to kill those kids, he don't mean that. America, you know what I'm talking about. And it's funny that when I wrote that, when I wrote the pilot, it was during the 2000 recount stuff. Okay. When I was writing the actual physical writing of it, right? When we couldn't have been more divided at that time, right?
Yeah.
But when it aired...
Little do we know.
I know, exactly. But when it aired, like a year later, it was right after 9/11. And we couldn't have felt more united compared to what... So when he said America, it really resonated with people in a way that I had never even imagined, So that's one of the things you can't count on. That was kind of
cool to think about. That was a cool show. Okay, one more thing on showbiz, then we'll do a quick rapid fire, get you out of here. Everybody, I have to ask because just like it's so intertwined in the political conversation, right?
Sure.
Which is this notion that somebody that has your job can't say what they really think now. They're worried. They're so worried about being canceled. Blah blah blah.
Great question.
What's talk about the real impact, how that's changed. Are there things you're concerned about, not concerned about? On that front?
That's a great question, and I don't think people are wrong to think that. I think it exists in culture at large now. It's not just a showbiz thing. I think because of social media and this kind of gotcha thing that people have the power of a microphone that is set on 11, unnecessarily, where before people would have to write a letter to somebody, take
and then
the time to think something out. Now people can immediately express a larger-than-life dissatisfaction with a smaller-than-life situation. So reactions are way out of proportions to deeds in my mind, where it used to be the other way around. Deeds were out of proportion to reactions. It seemed like you would have to get people together to protest things and governments or whatever. Now you can have a very large platform to protest something somebody said. Which is ridiculous,
Yeah, right.
And people can lose their jobs because of that. So I think in the culture, there's a lot of fear about, am I treading improperly here and will something bad happen to me?
Yeah.
Will people shun me or whatever?
Yeah, sure.
And
will I not be able to get another writing job? Will I not get another acting job?
I mean,
right?
in showbiz, I'm sure maybe people think that way, but maybe not. I personally don't feel that way myself. To a large extent, there are some issues that I just won't go into because I know what's the point, Larry, especially on social media. If I'm going to talk about something, I'll use a proper platform where I can really talk about it, like on my podcast or that. But you'll rarely see me tweeting about divisive issues because Twitter is the worst place to get an idea across. And social media in general is, I'd rather do it in an interview on television or, like I said, on a podcast or that type of thing. If I have something that I think might touch those type of buttons, I want to make sure I'm properly represented in what I'm saying.
But you don't feel like, just really quick, like the comedy shows, television shows, stand-up, are like is stifled. People are creatively stifled. Or do you think maybe they are?
I don't know. I mean, it depends what people want to dramatize, I don't...
Yeah.
People may not want to dramatize the things that you think they're not supposed to dramatize,
Yeah.
They have to be interested in dramatizing it first and for them to feel stifled, I guess,
Right.
I think what different generations feel is important to talk about changes as well as people's wanting to hear it. I think both of those things can be true.
All right.
I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for other people.
No, that's good. It's interesting to just hear. Okay, you've been very generous with your time. Quick rapid fire. I've got 2 topics. The first one we get everybody on. We're never Trumpers here, so we've had had to do a lot of reflecting in our life, myself in particular. And so I like to ask everybody something that they've changed their mind on as a grown-up. I like to cultivate a culture where it's okay to change your mind on shit. You don't have to be stubborn, So is there anything you've changed your mind on as a grown-up? It could be about anything. It doesn't have to be politics.
Another really good question. I think I changed my mind, this is going to sour, on everybody's relationship is different. I'll be like, whatever you agree to in your relationship is fine. Let's put it like that. Yes. Like, there don't necessarily have to be rules for all relationships. I used to think
romantic relationships.
Yes, romantic relationships. I'm talking about. I think I've changed my mind, just mainly just being naive, honestly.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I never had a strong opinion about this, but it was more out of naivete. Relationships should work like this, and that's how things should be, right?
Yeah.
But no, after I was married for 20 years, I went through a divorce. I've seen friends go through this and that. We've seen culturally the world has changed. That type of thing. I say whatever 2 people agree to in a relationship, fine. We shouldn't have to. You. Yeah, we absolutely, Tim. It was like, who am I to say that their rules have to adhere to someone else's rules? I think I've changed more about that than anything else.
All right, I want to go down a Wilmore rabbit hole. So I've got 3 bests and a worst for you. If there are any you don't know, that's fine. But a best in living color skit to go down a YouTube hole, best Daily Show or Wilmore Show bit, best stand-up set or joke that I haven't seen. Could be you or someone else. Any of those jump out. I want to get on YouTube on the plane home and just do a dive.
My favorite living color, I'll say the one that I wrote. There you go.
Of course.
Because I'll say my favorite was when Jamie Foxx, who I hope he's getting better, he had some stuff happen recently. Jamie Foxx was so talented. He was new on the show, and he had this character we called Ugly Woman. That was the name of her, and it was Wanda.
I remember.
And it was, yes. And I came up with the sketch where he would be getting a massage from Tommy Davidson, and Tommy couldn't see his face because he's in the massage thing like this. And without seeing her face, he's like, oh, man, he's coming onto her and he's doing all these things. And Jamie, and of course the audience knows it's Jamie's character and all that stuff. And so when Jamie first shows his face, and Tommy Davidson, he's got like this. Oh, no, it was Tommy who couldn't see him. That's what it was. Tommy couldn't see him. Tommy was face down, and Jamie was giving him a massage. That's what it was. I wanted to get this proper. Sense. And so Tommy was like this and couldn't see him, and just this nice woman is giving him a massage and all that stuff.
All over him.
And flirting and all that stuff. Yeah, but the audience can see that it's Jamie's character, and they're laughing. And then as soon as Tommy sees her and he's ready to do something, he jumps off of that table. He had these little Speedo like underwear on, and skinny Tommy Davidson like is running around. Jamie kind of pulls him down. We see his little butt, I think, at one point. And I have never heard an audience laugh so hard as them. They were stomping their feet. I mean, that's one of the fun things about a live audience. I mean, I've never heard a reaction like that. I was so happy that I wrote it too, and that was my favorite memory of In Living Color was doing that sketch and seeing Jamie Foxx chase Tommy Davidson around that set was so much fun.
Okay, do you have a Daily Show one or a stand-up one for me, or should I just do In Living Color?
In Living Color's good. Daily Show, I don't know. We did a lot of fun ones. I mean, a completely inappropriate one probably today would be look up the Mark Twain one. We deconstructed his use of the N-word, and I was very proud of that. It's going to offend a lot of people even today.
Okay. All right, I'll look up. Those two sound good.
I guarantee it to be offensive even now, but it's one of my favorite.
Final one is, I guess I was going to ask the worst podcast guest that you have, but was there anybody that was worse than me? I'm looking for,
No, you were bad, Tim. No. Yes.
Worst.
I had a really bad one.
Okay.
And I didn't even hear it. That's how bad it was. He wouldn't answer any questions. He was an actor who was just being actor.
We won't name the person.
I won't even name him because I was so frustrated.
To the grave.
Oh God, it was like he wouldn't give me anything, And it was early on when I was still, we were still finding your footing and everything, And I said, we can't air this shit. This is horrible. This is terrible. And he just didn't care. He could care less about being there because we were doing it in person then. This wasn't Zoom.
Yeah.
And, Tim, it was just the worst. It was so bad. Yeah.
Well, I hope to never have one of those. We're just getting this thing started. I'm so grateful that you did it. Hopefully we can hang out again soon. Roll on through New Orleans sometime.
I will.
Would love it. Everyone should check out your podcast, of course. And just really quick from Sebastian, Grace, Class, and Poise were the stripper names. So that was it. Those were the Bill Clinton strippers. Grace, Class, and Poise.
God, it's funny how there's jokes that I can't even remember.
I was laughing at my hotel last night.
There were jokes that I was going to do, and I cut at the last minute, And some were kind of hardcore, but what are you going to do?
Thank you for your Grace, Class, and Poise. We'll be talking, and everybody else will see you on Wednesday for the Normal Next Level podcast with Sarah and JVL. We'll catch everybody later. Peace.